Hello, hello, hello. It's Dr. Torie here with another episode of Be Victorious. You all know you can find me on social media everywhere. I'm on social media platforms. I'm on Twitter. I am on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Pinterest. I'm on Facebook. I'm everywhere, you guys. Just make sure you follow me. Make sure you are following me on all social media platforms. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube where you can see this. But I will let you all know we are everywhere. We're in podcast land finally. So you can actually find this podcast streaming on everywhere. We're talking about iHeartRadio. We're talking about Spotify. We're talking about Apple Podcasts. So any podcast that you think of, we finally made it. So I thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe. And I look forward to all the feedback and responses that you all are giving. Thank you so much. Now, this episode is actually going to be a very special episode. Of course, I think all of my episodes are special, but this one here, I'm interested in this story. Me and Mike have been talking for a while. I love everything about him. He's such an amazing person. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mike. So, Mike, go ahead and join us.
So, Dr. Torie, thank you for welcoming me on your podcast. It's really a pleasure to be here. I love the work you're doing. The topic of ACEs is deep, and not everyone wants to talk about the things that we need to talk about. So I greatly appreciate your courage and choosing to talk about what really matters. So I like deep conversation. I like to go to those places where people don't necessarily want to go, because that's where we need to go. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to this conversation.
I do too, because again, like you said, this is a conversation people don't want to discuss, but ACEs is a public health issue and people really don't know about it. They're used to hearing the word trauma, but they really don't know that there's something behind that. So with us having the discussions that we've had, I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation too. So
Yeah. So when anyone asks me, tell me a story, or tell me, where you've been, I always ask them, how much time do you have? Because I first of all believe we all have a story. We've all been through difficult situations. We're all in this skin suit as a human being. And a little bit about I'll start from the present day, and then we can get into the nitty gritty, which I know you want to discuss, childhood ACEs, things like that. But today I am a 39-year-old male, and I just turned 39 last week. I'm a Cancer. I'm sensitive. I like my fridge full. I'm a homebody. I love to get into entrepreneurial endeavors. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I have a business supporting people to heal, and we can talk about that later on. But I reside here in Sedona, Arizona. I'm originally from Boston, as your podcast producer sniffed out real quick with my accent. So if you hear that's where it's from. But yeah, I'm an average Joe here, having a good time, having the best human experience I can have, and living a good life.
and you are, and you're amazing. And your healing journey is something we're definitely going to discuss. So, again, I thank you for being a part of the story. I thank you for being a part of this ACEs journey because you are correct. We have to talk about this. So, I'm going to start off by asking you a few questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
And then we can go from there. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Please tell us what ACEs, short for adverse childhood experiences, what is it?
So adverse childhood experiences was brought up through Dr. Vincent Felitti. And Dr. Vincent Felitti was working with a population of people. And at one point, I can't speak verbatim the question he mispronounced, but he mispronounced a question asking the female patients. And what he began to realize was that a lot of weight issues and issues women were facing were due to an ACE question about sexual abuse. So he was shocked by that. And then he began to create this survey called the Ace Questionnaire of 10 questions. And he began to ask specific questions to his patients to see what they would, how they would answer, or what their ACE score would be. Let's just say you have, you answer yes to 5 questions, you would have an ACE score of 5. Say yes to 7, you have an ACE score of 7. And he began to find this deep correlation between trauma
Mhm.
and adverse childhood experiences and early onset disease and ailments and syndromes that people were suffering from. And it was so big. I think the study was over 17,000 participants.
It was.
So yeah, that's kind of my understanding about ACEs. And I first got introduced to ACEs through a mentor. One of my mentors is Dr. Paul Epstein. I studied under him for 3 years, and long story short, he chose to be an ND instead of an MD. And he, let me give you the quick story because I think your audience will really love this. His dad was responsible for picking up the bodies on D-Day. So that was very traumatic. He was a medic. And when his dad came home from the war, his dad was there, but his dad wasn't really there. Meaning the look in his dad's eye, he was vacant. They would call that shell shocked or PTSD now. And he realized his dad was missing. And as a young boy, his family he was told his dad was out working, doing assignments, but his dad was really at mental institutions because he was suffering from PTSD. And his dad was on the operating table to get a triple bypass. And what Dr. Epstein came to conclude was his dad had a heart problem because his dad was trying to bypass the pain from the war. And he had a reoccurring dream as a young boy that they were taking his dad away. And he was saying in his dream, please don't take my dad. Please don't take my dad. It's all my dad needs to do is experience his pain. So as I share that story with you, it's emotional for me because it's really deep in the aspect that you don't have our current medical establishment linking the correlation between ACEs and early onset disease. The dis-ease becomes disease. The issues are in the tissues. The biography of what we live through is in the biology. In fact, one great quote from Dr. Epstein, what he would say is, the organs weep the tears the eyes cannot shed. So that was my introduction to ACEs through Dr. Paul Epstein, which I'm forever grateful.
The issue is in the tissue. I'm quoting you on that. That's pretty good because it's the truth.
Yeah, and I didn't come up with that one, but that is for sure the situation.
It is. It is. And for everyone that knows, they know that I educate people on ACEs. That was great. That has been the best explanation that I've heard as far as the background, as far as everything. So you are very well versed on adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah, and I think what makes me even more qualified is I've had to live through many of them and come out the other side to healing. And that's the beauty of, I know you share your story and your ACEs and yeah, that's what we're here to do. I believe
Yes.
we're here to teach, people what we've had to heal. So I've been in this from a, let's say, study academia type perspective, and most important, I've been in the territory
Yeah,
of healing.
you have. Do you want to share your ACEs score?
Yeah, it was actually, I got a fresh copy right here that I printed out before, and I'm flirting between a 6 and a 7.
Okay. Okay. And you know about the ACEs categories.
Yeah, I saw that on your questionnaire. I was a little curious about that. Tell me more what you mean about that specifically.
So that they're broken down into 3 different categories. The initial ACEs 10 questionnaire is broken down into 3 different categories. You have your abuse, you have your neglect, and you have household dysfunction. And so in the abuse category, of course, it's sexual mental, emotional abuse. And then in the neglect area, it's sexual, emotional, and mental neglect. And then the household dysfunction has questions, incarcerated family members, witness mom or dad in abusive relationships, separation or divorce. Well, of course, that was 1998. Here it is, 2019. We have what they call extended ACEs. A few examples of that is terrorism. We've had a lot of that recently. I think they need to add gun violence, but that's just my personal opinion. You have racism, you have community violence, community upbringing. All of that is in the extended ACEs. So in the initial ACEs, I always ask which one, because a lot of people are okay with that. Like, say, for example, my 6 and 7, depending on the day, I'm just like you, goes into household dysfunction. No, I wasn't sexually abused. However, that household dysfunction for me was huge. And so I always ask the listeners, or ask anyone that I'm talking to, whether I'm doing professional development or just talking, what category best suits you.
Yeah, so as I sit and look at this ACE score in front of me, the dynamic of my household was a little bit different in the context, as I had a providing parent, my father, but my parents were divorced and I was split from my mother at 3. So it's kind of where these different offshoots of, yes, my dad was somewhat mentally ill, right? But I wasn't sexually abused in the house, but sexual abuse is part of my story out of the house. So it kind of, flexes and flows in between quite a few categories. What I can say is, I think one that's not on here that maybe should be is, was your mother traumatized while you were in utero? Because that's really where it began for me. And I think the separation from my mother and the ACE score number 6 here, where your parents ever separated, divorce. Yes, I think that was probably the most devastating one for me, although it sounds so simple. And I think the trauma my mom experienced in utero set the stage epigenetically for me to express the disease and the addiction that happened later on as a early or young adult.
And so our commonality is the generational trauma. You were born into generational trauma. I would love for you to go ahead and tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we hold the trauma from our lineage at a cellular level. And God knows there was a lot of trauma in my family that was passed down. And what I can say about that is, before I came into this world, I was swimming in a sea of cortisol in my mother's womb, obviously, where we all start. And I was under a lot of stress because she was under a lot of stress. And she was under stress because she discovered my dad's secret. And my dad was a religious figure. And he was a minister for a born again Christian church. But before that, my dad was a Catholic priest. And your ears might perk up and say, "Oh, Catholic priest." And it's deep, but my dad was part of the Catholic abuse clergy scandal and had sexual allegations against him of molesting people while he was in the seminary. So my mom didn't know all of that, I don't believe, but she found him watching pornography while I was in her womb. And here she was, the preacher's wife, a huge congregation. She was beautiful. And here she was married to this guy who was clearly living some other life that she was just stumbling upon. And as he was confronted, he was threatening my mother. And so my mother was under a lot of stress, and she took off and had to protect us. And later on, because there's many aspects of the story and facets, she lost custody of us because back in the 80s, like no one was ready to hear about a Catholic priest inappropriately touching people. People just weren't ready for that message. And my mother tried multiple times to say he's not fit to raise them because of X, Y, and Z. And some of them, we're talking about head psychiatrists of establishments like Mass General Hospital, slid their chair about 7 feet from her when she said that and basically sent her out the door. So no one was ready to kind of hear that. So she was all alone, and she was traumatized. And yet here I was, coming into this world. And after I was born, it took about 3 years. And my mother couldn't take her own trauma, and she began using alcohol. And my father did what he did and fought for custody of us. Now there's a lot of stuff in there. The audience may be going, well, did he molest you? And I have a sister. The answer to that question is I still don't know. I can tell you from a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy journey on the drug MDMA, which is street name is ecstasy, there was something that came up in my psyche about it. And I don't know if it was an imprint from his perpetrating energy or it actually happened, but something's there. And that's still something I'm trying to unravel and discover. But nonetheless, my dad was a very traumatized individual. And fast forwarding years down the road before I severed the relationship with him because it was just too toxic, or I should say, after I severed the relationship, he wanted to talk to me one last time before he thought he was going to pass away, which I talked to him. And I asked him, who molested you? And he told me. He told me, because hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. I believe we're all fundamentally Buddhas at our core. I don't think little babies come into this world as pedophiles and murderers. Things happen to these babies. Racism is taught. They're shown through people who are holding immense trauma and distorts us, and we get layered and programmed. So getting back to kind of the story is, my mom lost custody. My father raised me from 3 to about 16. And then I discovered his secret the same way my mother did. When this mystery voice told me to go look under his mattress after we got a computer in our house and some sketchy things was happening, and something said, go look under there. And I did. And there was pornography of the same sex. It wasn't children, but it was pornography. And I was like, oh, okay. And then my whole world got flipped from the son of a born again Christian preacher, my dad holier than thou, to wow, he's gay, and what else is going on? And about a year or so later is when all the priests started coming out. And then that's when my father had a tough conversation with my sister and I and just said, be prepared, something may happen. So I'll kind of fade off there. We'll go into maybe your next question or where you kind of want to go from here.
I'm see, so of course we've talked. I want you to go all in because we still haven't even gotten to you and your hip. This is just the beginning. So I say, go ahead and go in. The listeners, I'm sure, like, come on, Dr. Torie, stop talking and let him finish. So I'm going to go ahead and let you finish.
Yeah, beautiful. So everyone's parent or a majority of parents weren't priests. So you may not be able to identify on that level as a listener, but the separation from a caregiver or a divorce or a sexual abuse or the inability for your parent to nurture you and love you. My dad didn't have a paternal instincts. He wasn't nurturing. There was no soothing. In fact, I'm one of those kids that bounced their head on the pillow and sang Jesus songs to himself. And that was a touching moment when I realized as an adult what I was doing, and I was soothing my nervous system as a little child. So we do this in all sorts of different ways, but I'm supporting the audience to say, hey, neglect doesn't necessarily have to be sexual abuse, physical abuse, war trauma. It can be the lack of attunement from a caregiver that can disrupt the attachment system of your little nervous system. And so then you develop, let's say, anxious, right? You get clingy, right? You need that support, or you get avoidance. Where in my family, like, closeness, it was always an argument. There was always yelling. There was always some sort of chaos. There was never time for regulation and repair and finding that security in one's nervous system. It was just constant on all the time, chaos, stress, trauma, right? So my little nervous system got wired towards, right? Like, first, I can't trust human beings like mom and dad. If you can't trust mom and dad, your relationships will definitely be skewed as an adult. So I was going and experiencing all of this, not knowing what it was until I started studying trauma and getting into my own work. But here I am in this very traumatized family dynamic. And, my father has skeletons in his closet. My mom's an alcoholic. So I hit the road. I'm like, let's get out of this house. And I was introduced to cigarettes and marijuana at a young age, 11 years old.
That's what I was just about to ask you. So all of this is going on. Generational trauma, finding out about mom, finding out about dad, and you were introduced at the age of 11?
11 years old, I smoked my first joint on the pond that was frozen after we were playing a game of ice hockey. And I cried my first joint. I laughed. I kind of had the whole mix, and I went home and ate stew and told my sister I smoked a joint. And she was like, no way, you're just joking. And I honestly didn't like it, but I needed to escape the traumatic activation in my nervous system. And that was something other than feeling the deep pain. It was better than feeling the deep pain. So I continued exploring with that. And then people laugh at me and my wife when I say wine coolers. I don't know what they're called now, spritzers or whatever. We had a bunch of wine coolers, and then a Mickey's Ice 40 ounces. And then before you know it, I got my first drunk on. I'm chilling with the older kids. I'm in the mix. I'm accepted to some degree, even though I was the youngster partying with all these older cats. They were like, oh, who's this dude? He's young. What's going on? And I'm, over here doing my thing, but I was escaping the household, and I was self-medicating with the substances. Now, I believe addiction is just a symptom of the trauma, and it's a coping mechanism and maladaptive behavior and pattern to deal with the activation of trauma in one's body. So I explored with marijuana, and then I got into harder drugs. And before you know it, I'm 16, 17 years old, and I got introduced to Oxycontins, which are the synthetic opioids. And we didn't know what they were. We were just having a good time. And before you know it, me and my buddies are all strung out to the gills on Oxycontins. So at this point, I had discovered my dad's secret. Like I said, the home wasn't fit for me to be at. So during that challenging time of discovering his secrets and him being in this frenzy of his last days of hiding his secrets, I could obviously feel and sense. And there was a lot of stuff that was going on in my household that wasn't appropriate. So I left, and I wound up going to a buddy's, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. I just began to weep and cry just randomly, and they were like, "What's wrong, Mikey?" And it took me about 3 or 4 Captain and Cokes, rum and Cokes, to finally say what was going on in my household. My father is in a frenzy with pornography, and it's scary, and I don't know what's going on. And his mother said, okay, you're coming to live with us. So I moved in, and it wasn't the best household because all of us were using drugs. I was the drug dealer at the time. And but it was better than where I came from. And so I found myself with a $500 a day Oxycontin habit. And
Wow.
if you think about opioids, they run the same channels, the same neurobiology as a mother's affection, bonding, working with different synaptic connections of feeling at ease. And I was looking for my mother's love through this opioid because it made me feel so sheltered and safe and warm, and all of that. And it was the first time I ever felt like I lost my choice to choose whether or not I was using drugs or not. So my mother was in my life at the time on the peripheral edges, and she had her own addiction with booze still. And I said, Mom, I said, I can't stop doing these Oxycontins. And she said, okay, let's go to your doctor's office. Let's go to see the doctor. So my mom at this point, as well as I found myself trying to find refuge at her 1-bedroom apartment studio to get away as well. And she was so overwhelmed that her children were finally witnessing their dad's secret, because she held that for 15 years. So she didn't know what to do. It was extremely overwhelming. Her son's addicted to opioids, and she says, let's go to the doctor. So I go to my primary care doctor. I'm 18 years old. I sit next to the baby scale that's on the table, and he checks me out and he says, okay, Mike, you're good to go. And I say, okay, good to go where, doc? And he says, you're good to go to detox. Now I said to myself, if anyone can identify with addiction, I'm sure many people can, is it takes a lot of courage to go to detox, and
Yes.
takes a lot of courage to put the substance down. And yet my ego knew that, or at the time, this isn't how I think now, is only losers go to detox. Like, I got to do this myself.
Now,
So
how old were you when you went to detox?
I was 18. Well, I was
Okay.
18 when I was at the doctor's office, and I chose not to go to detox. So I grabbed a bunch of pills on the street. I played doctor, and I weaned myself off a $500 a day opioid habit. And I haven't touched opioids since, and it will be, I think, 19 years in November.
Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. So long story even shorter, is I still was using other substances. 2 years later, I got completely sober, let's say, off mind altering substances. And I finally began to face life without anesthetizing my trauma. So the kind of pinnacle of this story is me being in recovery for 10 years. And this is where I love the topic, and where people may sense into it, the listeners, is even when you put the substances down, and even if you can't identify with drugs or alcohol, what about sex addiction? What about workaholism? What about exercising at the gym? What about to exercising to exhaustion, or addiction to exercising? Addictions come in many, many forms.
Yeah.
So I found myself 10 years or 9.5 years in recovery, and my body had taken the burden. Just like you say, the aces begin to manifest in my tissues. And I bought my first home because I was doing super well. I was now in a top 1,000 Fortune company, headhunting engineers. And I bought my first double decker in a town called Weymouth, about 30 miles, 20 miles south of Boston. And I was working really hard. And at this point, I was stressing out an already stressed nervous system. Now, my nervous system had never regulated since I was in utero to this moment. I just had put the drugs and alcohol down, but I was still over exercising, couldn't stop, trying to make the money in the houses, and show the world that I'm worthy from my worth and accomplishments. And lo and behold, I get sick. And it starts with blood in my stool. And I said, oh, what's going on? And it got worse. And I went to the doctors, the GI doctor, and he said, Mike, we have to do a colonoscopy. I was a bit young for a colonoscopy. I was only like 25. And I just needed relief. I needed some sort of answers. And he did his colonoscopy, and he finished up, and I was in the recovery room, and I was, done with the procedure. And he said, you're getting a diagnosis of universalis ulcerative colitis, which meant my whole colon, my whole large intestine was ulcerated, and it was an autoimmune disease.
Stop and pause. Autoimmune disease. You found out at the age of 25?
25.
That's
And
young.
yeah, it was the symptoms. I couldn't deny the symptoms.
Right.
There were what we call prodromes and pre-prodromes. This is the work of somatic experiencing. There are things that cue us that a syndrome or an ailment is about to happen. But when you go 90 miles an hour like me, I'm not even in my body.
Mm-mm.
I'm between my chin and my crown all day in my mind. That's the problem with trauma, is there's no body there. No one wants to come to the body because the body bears the burden.
Mm-hmm.
There's a beautiful quote I would love to share with your audience.
Go ahead.
If you feel like that would be
Go ahead. If they are as in tune as I am, I'm sure they're looking forward to it.
Okay, beautiful. So this is by Alice Miller, and she wrote a couple books. One of them is called Breaking Down the Wall of Silence, the liberating experience of facing painful truth. And it says, the truth about childhood is stored up in our bodies and lives in the depths of our souls. Our intellect can be deceived. Our feelings can be numbed and manipulated. Our perceptions shamed and confused. Our bodies tricked with medication, but our soul never forgets.
No.
And because we are one whole soul in one body, someday our body will present its bill.
Send that to me.
I will. So the body was presenting its bill to me. I was diagnosed with universalis ulcerative colitis, but here's where there's a gap. And I know this is where you come in to advocate and teach, is do you think Dr. GI ever put his hand around me and said, hey, Michael, tell me your story.
Right.
How did your whole colon get ulcerated at 25 years old? What happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
No. Nope. Physicians are not taught to bring into the equation the biography of what we lived through and how it ends up in our biology. So I was shocked. He said, hey, take 6 of these, take some prednisone, and I'll see you in 3 to 6 months. So that's what I did. And amazingly, I got myself into remission, kind of, wasn't still 100%, but I was good enough to grab a backpack. And I was dating a Latina woman at the time, and she lived in California. I met her in Vegas. I was in Boston. I was flying back and forth. We thought I was gonna go out on the West Coast and live there and see how that went. And it didn't work out. But my company's like, yeah, take a sabbatical, whatever you want to do. I was doing really well. They were like, yeah, sure, we'll pay you. So I got paid to travel 9 different countries for 6 months. I backpacked. And I got a parasite in Guatemala that tripped off the UC again, and I had to come home early from Chile. So here I am. I'm back in Boston once again. Now let me remind you, I still haven't addressed any of these ACEs. I still haven't stopped to really look at what happened to me as a kid. I really haven't stopped to digest that I was completely littered with generational trauma. I hadn't stopped to actually remind myself that there's a body here present and I need to take good care of it. I was just mowing it right into the ground.
Mhm.
So I came home. I was so sick that Western medicine had a couple options for me. The new GI doctor I hired didn't know what to do with me at the end, because what happened, Dr. Torie, is I had a gut brain axis issue. For many of you that are listening, the gut and the brain are intricately connected. You're making 90% of your serotonin and dopamine right in your gut. So if you're suffering from mental health, you're suffering from affect health, meaning body health. The
Yep.
gut and the brain, the body and the psyche, body and brain are interconnected feedback loop through the
All together.
gut brain axis. So the inflammation was from my gut from ulcerative colitis, and it went to my brain, and I was suffering from multiple chemical sensitivity. I had always had a sensitive snout since I was a child, but something happened where I became super hyper aroused, and I was reacting to chemicals in my system. And we know today that the immune system and nervous system are interconnected.
Yes, they are.
And my immune system obviously has problems. My nervous system has problems. I think this was from the setting the stage of early childhood trauma in the womb. And now I'm having neurological issues, multiple chemical sensitivity, and I couldn't even be in this normal world. I was so stimulated by colognes, perfumes, diesel fuel, the cars that are driving around. I could smell you downwind like 70 feet. And it was so scary that I began to go inward because I needed to calm my nervous system. And what I mean by go inward is I needed solace. I needed quiet. I needed no stimulation. I started using my breath as an anchor to find the present moment. And at this point, the docs were saying, you might need to remove your colon, and the drug I was on that was no longer working for my IBD, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel disease, was intoxicating my liver. So the hepatologist said, you're going to need a liver transplant in about 8 years if you don't take care of this. And the GI doctor said, yeah, you might want to consider removing your colon. And I said, is this what you got for me? And they basically said, yeah.
So what's interesting is still no one has asked.
No one's asking any questions.
You are actually deteriorating.
Oh yeah.
At a young age.
And this is very common. This is more common than people think or even know what's going on.
That's why we're trying to educate them on ACEs, because this story is a wonderful example of finding out about your childhood experiences.
Yeah. And
so when did you decide, I got to do this on my own?
When did I decide I have to do this on my own? When they said when they said you may need to remove your colon, I couldn't, honestly, this is where I was. I couldn't imagine having a colostomy bag in my life. Like for me, like that was a non-negotiable thing.
Right.
And so I looked these guys in the face and I started to research. And I started back when you actually were given information on the online, accurate information. I began to research, and I found a functional medicine doctor that looks at the body as a whole integrative unit, and okay, the inflammation, the autoimmunity. So long story short, is I found her. But most importantly, I started to find myself. I started to find myself in the silence through the stimulation. And I'll share with you, because this gets deep. And I was brought up in a very religious, with very strong religious construct. And as a young kid, I always knew, there was spirit, right? That Jesus was probably this amazing teacher. I asked the angels for help when I was a kid. I was very connected to that. But at the same time, when this was happening, there was a part of me that was listening to teachings of the Buddha. Now, I'm not trying to convert anyone to any or religion. I'm just sharing my experience. And I began to listen to the teachings of the Buddha of the liberation of suffering. And that sounded like a good idea because I was about to take my own life. I was contemplating suicide because of the way I was feeling. Now, at a deeper biological level, what was happening at one point was I had my amygdalas, which is your brain's fight or flight mechanism, going off saying, there's a danger here. And then my cortex was like, no, relax. So smells would come in, they would trigger me. There's a danger. And then there was like, no, there's no real danger, Mike. Like, just relax. And I had this tug of war, and it was so challenging that I wanted to end it. And instead, I went inward and I started to awaken the inner healer within me that's in all of us. But we have to engage in the shift of our consciousness, how we see, how we perceive, for that to manifest at a physiological level. Meaning, Dr. E would say, disease is repetition compulsion. Compulsion to keep moving, can't stop, can't find the wholeness that's already present, and allowing the system, nervous system, body, to send messages and signals and shoot off hormones of healing versus stress hormones, epinephrine, cortisol, things of that nature. So finding the present moment over and over again, deeply, I had a profound spiritual awakening. And at one point it came in, you may appreciate this because I know you have I believe a Baptist background, if I may say. Is there was a part of me that I was having these profound spiritual awakenings. And when I mean, I was experiencing things you read about in books, with animals coming to you, downloads of information, just really intense. And I said, wow, man, this guy, Jesus, doesn't have anything on this guy, Buddha. And then I was like, wait, that's not right view. Right view is these are all teachings of the truth from these masters that showed up. And there's the truth, there's right view, there's seeing things as they are in the beauty in the present moment. Like the kingdom of God is in the present moment, right? Jesus said, be still and know that I am God.
Amen.
It's a consciousness. And I found it. And I started shooting off the signals of healing in my body: presence, calm, joy, abundance. I let go of my old job. I let go of everything that didn't serve me. I had no choice. And I was being redesigned into a different being.
I was going to say rewire, but yes, you are correct.
Yes, every fabric, at the cellular level, I was shifting. Now, if y'all are listening to this and you're like, oh, okay, there's no one that teaches this specific work better than Dr. Joe Dispenza. So listen to his stuff, and he actually shares the diagnostics and the imaging and what's happening when we meditate, when we find the moment, when we regulate our nervous systems. And that's the journey of transforming your pain and illness as an opportunity to heal.
And that was your motivation and reason to push forward and start your own healing journey. Congratulations.
Thank you. And you know what? Some people, see, I got a real thick skull. And some people like me need to be annihilated like the phoenix for them to burn and then rise again. Some people, like my wife, can get the lessons in much more subtle, less painful ways. But at the end of the day, if you're listening to this podcast, things happened to you most likely, but there's nothing wrong with you fundamentally at your core. But trauma will make you believe or support that there is. And that's just the dichotomy of trauma is, we hold it in, and the younger child, can't say, oh, mom and dad really don't have it together. They internalize it and say, what's wrong with me? Why don't I deserve mom's love?
Right.
So it took me to be annihilated and for me to have a rebirth to actually then begin to, and through that experience, I will say, I actually healed at such a deep level that was my healing journey. It was, and as Dr. E would say, all sickness is homesickness. All healing is self-healing, a journey back home to your true self. And that's the healing of trauma and healing of ACEs is to find our wholeness beyond the story of what happened to us.
Exactly. You are correct. And what you all don't understand is everybody has their own healing journey. We're talking to a man that pretty much from the inception. And here you are, though, Mike. Here you are. If it wasn't honestly for your awareness and you starting your own healing journey, so you gotta be grateful. Not to say that you're not, because again, you are. But that's an amazing story. And it's just the beginning because you've done so much work since.
Yeah, it's perfection.
Yeah, you've helped others though. You've used your story to actually help your not only your healing journey, but other people's journey. So I'm going to just go ahead and go in and ask that you tell us about it. If you all are not aware, please go to the website. Just the personal testimony there and the things that are offered are on the website. Mike's a coach. I'm a coach. We get along. We're great. But he does a lot. So tell me a little bit more about what you do now.
Yeah, so I think I want to start off by saying, in the field of healing, it happens at the level of equals. We're peer to peer, we're human to human. And I was blessed with these, what I call Mount Everest like hurdles. So I could catalyze it into something greater. And when I say it's perfection, the story is perfection. At a soul level, I believe I called in. Now we're talking about a soul. As a soul level, I believe I called in my parents and was born into these beings in order for this soul, my soul, to learn the lessons it needed to learn to evolve and move on. So as the awakening or the shift in consciousness was birthed and it was happening, I said, I needed exactly this pain for me to awaken and shift my consciousness. And that led me onto a journey of continuing and still continuing of self-exploration. I started a study under Dr. Paul Epstein in mind body healing. I went back and got a certification in holistic health and wellness, and to be a mindfulness teacher, because mindfulness, as Bessel van der Kolk, a leading doctor in trauma, he wrote the book The Body Keeps the Score. He says mindfulness is a cornerstone in the healing of trauma. And trauma, I believe it's his quote again, is an illness of not being alive in the present moment. And to come to this moment is crucial. So I had to integrate, or I do integrate mindfulness and consciousness in my work, because we're more than just this body. We're this spirit, we're this soul, we're this presence. So today I'm also a somatic experiencing practitioner, which is a 3-year training process to support people in the resolution of trauma. So I integrate all of these different modalities into my work as a coach, and support people to heal. Now, my trademark and my brand is healing beyond recovery. But
Mhm.
let me simplify that. Recovery, I believe we're all recovering from something, some sort of behavior, some sort of addiction. We're all in recovery from something.
Mhm.
And I just happen to have had a battle with addiction when I was younger. And that's who found me, was people in recovery looking for healing. So I do a lot of that work. I'm not limited to just working with people in substance abuse addiction, but I believe we're all in recovery. So my trademark is healing beyond recovery. And I take a holistic integrative approach to support the whole person. And I have a functional medicine doc that's part of my practice. I work with the neurobiology using Dr. Porter's work with brain tap, meditation, and really leading people back home to themselves. I
Mhm.
think we all have the answers. We just need someone to be that midwife to find who we are.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And this journey for me is this. It it's educating people about adverse childhood experiences because there are so many people out there, and I'm going to say a lot of us. We just don't identify with it, or we choose not to identify with it. But here it is, you identify with it quite well. You identify with it because you really didn't have any choice. It was you from the inception, from the beginning, and the fact that you went through and experienced so much. This is enough, you guys. I mean, the podcast has been going for the longest, but this story, if the first story didn't surprise you, this one should wake you up. We're not alone in this journey. We are actually here for healing, to understand what our aces are and heal. And I thank you because
Yeah.
you're doing that. You're doing the work. You're using your experiences to not just help others, but ooh, to continue to educate and share your story. It's an amazing story. It's not one that one would want to share. And so I thank you so much for actually sharing as much as you have, because again, we've talked, and that's the for me, the discussion is part of the journey. It's part of the healing process too.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a term for that. It's called narrative medicine. And
Interesting.
and just sharing your story
Mhm,
can be healing.
mhm. Never heard of.
So yeah, and I appreciate you stepping out on all your platforms. I almost got anxiety when you told me how many you were on. Uh, it's great though. For me, I have a very ambivalent pattern with social media, but
And the crazy thing is, I have to. This isn't. I'm not even at year 2 yet, Mike. Surprise, surprise. I'm not. But as you see, even the introduction and all of this, it's what I want to do, but it's by choice because of me being in education and working with and witnessing so many students that I've came across. I've been teaching for 17, almost 18, well, it'd be 18 years. So 18 years of watching this from youth is the issue for me. You know what I mean? So I think that's the reason why I have to do this, because I know that it could impact someone. And so I have to continue to do it. It's a journey.
yeah.
It's a journey.
It's
But
beautiful. It's like the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell's work.
mhm,
You get the calling, you fight the dragon, you slay the dragon, and you come back with the elixir. And it's like we went through our own struggles. We had to fight the dragon, overcome our obstacles. We
mhm,
got the elixir, now the healing, and now we're bringing that and sharing it to the world. It's like when that happened to me, the shift and the awakening, I was like, oh, this is exactly why
mhm.
this has happened, so I can support people. Now, the great psychologist, I love this quote. Carl Jung, he says, you either have to have gone through or going through the process in order to initiate the healing to the patient. Only the wounded heal. So we have the archetype of the wounded healer, and it's beautiful because now we have a different perspective from where we once were to where we now. And it's like, hey guys, come along, like check
Mhm.
this out, like take this ACE score, let this open your eyes,
Right.
feel into this. Like this is what you've been carrying around in your cells, in your body, in your colon, in your heart, in your liver, in your
Yeah,
yeah, and you can heal it too.
really can. We just got to continue. We got to be the ones that are willing to do that. You're willing to do it, and I'm willing to do it. What's interesting is I have a list of questions. And as I'm going through these questions, you've pretty much answered a lot of them just basically by having this discussion. Seriously. How important is the conversation of ACEs? We're doing that right now. If you can add anything to the ACEs category, we talked about that already. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
this discussion has to happen. It doesn't need to happen here. Not only here, let me retract and say it does need to happen. However, we're not doing it as much as we should. And so I thank you. Just the fact that the work that you're doing, again, you might not think this is a lot. It's a lot. I don't want it to overwhelm you or overcome, because to me, I feel like there was things that you never told me. And I'm like, really? You didn't, which I'm glad that the listeners were able to hear that. But this is a living testimony, you guys. I mean, you can heal. You can heal. You have to take those initiatives and take those steps. I tell people, you don't necessarily have to go to a therapist. There are all different types of therapy out there. There's yoga, a queen therapy. There's just, it's a lot. It's out there. You just have to take those steps for yourself. And so the fact that you've done that, you're certified, you've done, I mean, your work is amazing. I keep saying it, but it's the truth. You have to go out there. I actually researched you. And that's why I knew it was best to come to you and share exactly what I was doing, because this conversation has to be had. I don't think it's getting any better at all, especially with, I mean, it was my daughter that brought to my attention that there's been a mass shooting every day in 2022. So gun violence season isn't even on the ACEs platform, but it should be.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
we have,
you reminded me of this quote. I it came to me one day, about people who are suffering with addiction and even somewhat illness. Like the body is remarkably resilient and is made to be in homeostasis. And if you're I quoted, if you're in recovery from addiction and not talking about ACEs, you're talking about the wrong thing.
exactly.
So it's to bring this conversation and topic to the forefront is a gift. And yeah, I appreciate your courage to face your own aces and your
Mhm.
own story.
Mhm.
um yeah, and
It's not for the weak at
yeah,
all.
no, this is the hardest work you'll ever have to do, but it's the most rewarding. Because
Mhm.
what are you going to do? You're going to There's a great quote by Anjan Cha. He says there's two types of suffering: suffering you run away from and it chases you everywhere, or there's suffering you face directly and so you become free.
Mhm.
This is about turning towards that those adverse child experiences with a sense of compassion,
Mhm.
and you can heal those younger parts of you that were traumatized and abused and neglected, and you can find this functional adult or self energy or compassionate witness that can be birthed from you tending to your own suffering.
That's it.
And that's what most of us need. Is we need connection. Like you said, it doesn't have to be with a therapist, but yoga, some form of connection, and compassion,
Mhm.
self-compassion, and with those two alone, um, deep transformation can happen.
I agree. I agree. I if there's anything that you want to let or tell our listeners, one more thing, one more important thing, what would that be?
it would to really take a moment to reflect how beautiful of a being you are and how many conditions had to come together for the manifestation of this physical body in the here and the now. And just like a painting from Picasso or a sculpture from Michelangelo, we are that in the living essence. And if you can just turn towards yourself with that sense of appreciation and kindness for everything you've been through, and look at it like that, as if you were just holding presence for yourself for a split second, the truth can come in. And it's the truth that liberates, not your effort to be free, free from the suffering. I tried to liberate myself from the suffering of busyness, of money, of attainment, of all that stuff. And yet I had to see the truth of what happened to me. And in seeing that, with that sickening body, I got to nurture myself back to health. So if you can see the truth that you're an amazing being, there's nothing wrong with you, things happen to you, you can, for a split second, shoot through that ego and touch into that truth of that conscious, loving presence, which is all of our true nature.
I agree.
I am the truth, the light, and the way. That's the eternal presence of who we are at the core, even beyond the flesh. So embrace yourself as this magnificent being and see if you can meet yourself with compassion. That's the antidote.
I agree. I think you're amazing. You know that already. I tell you all the time, but I'm serious because it's been a pleasure connecting with you. I'm sure I'm going to have tons of questions, but before I do that, I want you to let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, so my website is mikegovoni.com, MikeGovoni. My Instagram is Mike Govoni, same thing. I rarely check Facebook, but you can find me on my website. You can, if you're interested in working or talking about my work, you can fill out a questionnaire there. We can jump on a complimentary discovery call. I have a podcast with, I don't know, a couple dozen episodes. I kind of left it for a moment just to put a pause, but it's called the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast. So yeah, website or Instagram.
Thank you, Mike. I
Thank you
thank
so
you for
much.
taking time out of your schedule. I don't want to hold you any longer. But again, I thank you for coming on this podcast because that's what we're here for. We're here to educate, and you have done just that. So thank you so much for being a guest, and we will be working together very soon.
Thank you. It's been a
Thank you
pleasure to be here.
guys for tuning in. This is Dr. Victorious. I have to thank Mike for coming in. The story when I first heard it was enough for me to bring him on, and I had to because again, you all think that this isn't happening when it really is. We all have aces, you guys. We do. We just need to identify exactly what it is, and when we find out what it is, do something about it. It's what I say all the time, and I'm sticking with it. This is Dr. Torie. I'm going to go ahead and end here. Thank you for listening. You can find me on all social media platforms. Dr. Victorious on Instagram, Dr. Victorious on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, Pinterest. I'm pretty much everywhere, you guys. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Thank you so much for tuning in, and you all will hear from us soon.